The year 1400 dawned upon an England gripped by political upheaval and simmering unrest. Just a year prior, Henry Bolingbroke had seized the crown from his cousin, the unpopular Richard II, in a daring act that would come to be known as the Revolution of 1399. However, Henry's path to secure his newfound role as King Henry IV was far from smooth. As the new year began, a plot was already afoot to challenge the Lancastrian usurper and restore the deposed monarch to the throne. This plot would culminate in a dramatic uprising that has gone down in history as the Epiphany Rising. On January 6, 1400, the Feast of the Epiphany, a band of Richard II's loyal supporters sprang into action. Led by the formidable Thomas Holland, Duke of Surrey, and a cohort of disgruntled nobles and knights, the rebels struck swiftly, capturing key castles and fortresses across the realm. Their ultimate objective was nothing less than the overthrow of the upstart Henry IV and the restoration of the rightful king, Richard II. Despite his flaws and unpopular reign, many still held fast to the notion of the divine right of kings, and they viewed Henry's actions as nothing short of treason against the anointed sovereign. As news of the uprising spread, panic gripped the Lancastrian court. Henry IV, himself a seasoned military commander, rallied his forces and marched to confront the rebels. In the ensuing clashes, the king's troops displayed their mettle, gradually quelling the uprising through a combination of force and negotiation. The decisive blow came at the Battle of Cirencester, where Henry's men overwhelmed the rebel forces, capturing many of the key conspirators. Among those taken prisoner was the ringleader himself, the Duke of Surrey, who would later be executed for his role in the failed revolt. With the Epiphany Rising crushed, Henry IV could breathe a momentary sigh of relief, but the spectre of further unrest and potential challenges to his authority loomed large. For the deposed Richard II, the failed uprising would prove to be a tragic coda to his tumultuous reign. In the aftermath of the rebellion, rumors swirled that Richard himself had been involved in the plot, prompting Henry to take drastic measures to silence the former king once and for all. Richard, who had been held in captivity at Pontefract Castle, was allegedly starved to death in a brutal act of regicide that horrified many across the realm. To quell any lingering doubts about Richard's fate and to assert his own legitimacy, Henry IV made the controversial decision to put the former king's body on public display. In a macabre spectacle, Richard II's corpse was conveyed to the Old St. Paul's Cathedral in London, where it was propped up and exhibited for all to see. For 3 days, the citizens of London filed past the grisly sight, bearing witness to the demise of their once mighty monarch. Some wept openly, while others viewed the display as a stark reminder of the fragility of earthly power and the consequences of defying the new Lancastrian order. The display of Richard II's body was a calculated move by Henry IV, designed to crush any hopes of a restoration and to send a chilling message to those who might still harbor thoughts of rebellion. By confronting the populace with the undeniable reality of their former king's death, Henry sought to solidify his own claim to the throne and deter further challenges to his authority. Yet, even as Henry sought to tighten his grip on power, whispers and rumors persisted. Tales of Richard's miraculous escape from captivity or of impostors claiming to be the lost king continued to circulate, fueling an air of uncertainty and intrigue that would plague the early years of the Lancastrian dynasty. As the year drew to a close, the stage was set for further turmoil and conflict. Wales seethed with resentment under English rule, the threat of Scottish incursions loomed in the north, and the embers of dissent still smouldered among the English nobility. The events of 1400 would cast a long shadow over the remainder of Henry IV's reign, shaping the course of the nascent Lancastrian dynasty and setting the stage for the tumultuous years that lay ahead. It was a year that witnessed the violent suppression of one rebellion, only to foreshadow the many challenges and upheavals that would continue to rock the foundations of the English monarchy in the decades to come. As the year 1401 unfolded, the clouds of religious upheaval and Welsh insurgency gathered over the realm of King Henry IV. In a bid to solidify his tenuous grip on power, the Lancastrian monarch took bold steps that would have far-reaching consequences, both for the spiritual landscape of England and for the stability of his domains. On the religious front, Henry IV found himself grappling with the growing influence of the Lollard movement, a reform-minded sect that challenged the authority of the Catholic Church and advocated for a return to the pure teachings of the Bible. Led by the teachings of the late John Wycliffe, the Lollards had gained a significant following among the common folk, their ideas resonating with those yearning for spiritual renewal and a break from the perceived excesses of the established church. Alarmed by the spread of these heretical doctrines, and perhaps seeking to curry favor with the powerful ecclesiastical establishment, Henry IV took decisive action. In 1401, he gave royal assent to the controversial De Heretico Comburendo Act, a statute that effectively sanctioned the burning of heretics at the stake. This draconian legislation empowered the Church to identify and prosecute individuals deemed to be embracing heretical beliefs, with the ultimate punishment being a gruesome death by fire. The act marked a significant escalation in the state's involvement in matters of religious orthodoxy and sparked widespread fear and consternation among the Lollard faithful. In the ensuing years, the De Heretico Comburendo Act would be wielded as a potent weapon against the Lollard movement, leading to the persecution, imprisonment, and execution of many of its adherents. The first recorded victim of the act was William Sawtry, a Lollard priest who was burned at the stake in 1401, becoming a martyr for the cause and igniting a wave of popular outrage. As the flames of religious dissent smoldered, a far more literal conflagration was erupting in the Welsh marches, where the formidable rebel leader Owain Glyndŵr had taken up arms against English rule. Glyndŵr, a descendant of the ancient Welsh princes, had been embroiled in a long-standing dispute with his powerful neighbour, Lord Reginald Grey of Ruthin, over land and property rights. In 1401, this simmering feud erupted into open conflict at the Battle of Mynyd Hydgn. On September 16th, Glyndŵr's forces clashed with the troops of Lord Grey in a remote valley near the town of Corwin. What began as a skirmish over disputed lands quickly escalated into a full-scale battle, with Glyndŵr's outnumbered but determined Welsh forces emerging victorious against the English army. The Battle of Mynyd Hydgn proved to be a pivotal moment, not only in the personal conflict between Glyndŵr and Grey, but also in the broader struggle for Welsh independence. Galvanized by his unlikely triumph, Glyndŵr rallied the Welsh people to his cause, declaring himself Prince of Wales and vowing to throw off the yoke of English oppression. In the aftermath of the battle, Glyndŵr's rebellion rapidly gained momentum as disaffected Welshmen flocked to his banner. Towns and fortresses across Wales fell to the insurgents as the English grip on the region began to falter. Glyndŵr's forces dealt a series of stinging defeats to the king's troops, capturing key strongholds like Conwy and Ruthin, and laying siege to major castles like Caernarfon. As 1401 drew to a close, the spectres of religious dissent and Welsh insurrection loomed large over Henry IV's troubled reign. For Henry, these twin challenges represented a formidable test of his authority and his ability to maintain order within his domains. As the new year of 1402 dawned, it became increasingly clear that the winds of change were sweeping across England and Wales. The Lollard movement, though battered by persecution, would continue to exert its influence, challenging the spiritual status quo and sowing the seeds of future religious reform. And in the rugged Welsh heartlands, Owain Glyndŵr's rebellion would rage on, capturing the imagination of a nation yearning for self-determination and setting the stage for years of bloody conflict with the English crown. It was against this backdrop of escalating conflict that one of the most pivotal battles of the Welsh revolt would unfold. The Battle of Bryn Glas, also known as the Battle of Pillith. On June 22, 1402, Glyndŵr's forces clashed with an English army led by Sir Edmund Mortimer, the powerful Earl of March and a descendant of the former rulers of Wales. The battle took place near the town of Pillith in Radnorshire, a strategic location that controlled key routes into Wales. Mortimer, a seasoned military commander, had mustered a formidable force of English and Welsh loyalists, determined to crush Glyndŵr's rebellion once and for all. As the two armies met on the field of Bryn Glas, the clash was fierce and bloody. Glyndŵr's troops, fueled by a fervent belief in their cause and a deep-seated resentment of English rule, fought with a ferocity that took the English by surprise. Despite being outnumbered, the Welsh rebels held their ground, repelling wave after wave of Mortimer's attacks. In the heat of the battle, a pivotal moment occurred. Sir Edmund Mortimer himself was captured by Glyndŵr's forces, a stunning reversal of fortunes that would have far-reaching consequences. With their leader in enemy hands, the English forces were thrown into disarray, and the tide of the battle turned decisively in favour of the Welsh rebels. Glyndŵr's victory at Bryn Glas was a resounding triumph, not only on the battlefield, but also in the realm of propaganda and morale. The capture of Mortimer, a scion of one of the most powerful noble families in England, sent shockwaves through the English ranks and dealt a severe blow to their resolve. For Glyndŵr, the capture of Mortimer presented a unique opportunity. Rather than treating the Earl as a mere prisoner, he sought to win him over to the cause of Welsh independence. Mortimer, whose lineage traced back to the ancient Welsh princes, found himself caught between his English loyalties and the allure of Glyndŵr's vision for a free Wales. In a remarkable turn of events, Mortimer ultimately chose to throw his lot in with Glyndŵr, pledging his support to the rebellion and lending his considerable military expertise and noble standing to the Welsh cause. This defection of such a prominent English nobleman was a stunning coup for Glyndŵr, further bolstering the legitimacy of his uprising and striking fear into the hearts of the English authorities. As news of Mortimer's defection spread, alarm bells rang in the corridors of power in London. King Henry IV and his advisors realized that drastic measures were needed to quell the growing threat posed by Glyndŵr's rebellion and the potential for further noble defections. In response, the English Parliament took the extraordinary step of enacting a series of punitive laws specifically targeting the Welsh populace. These penal laws against Wales were a draconian set of measures designed to subjugate the Welsh people and break the spirit of Glyndŵr's uprising. The laws imposed harsh restrictions on the Welsh, curtailing their rights and freedoms, and effectively treating them as second-class subjects within the English realm. Welsh citizens were forbidden from holding positions of authority, owning property or bearing arms, among other oppressive measures. The intent behind these laws was clear: to crush the Welsh resistance through a combination of military force and legal oppression, stripping away the rights and liberties that fueled the fires of rebellion. As the year 1402 drew to a close, the reverberations of the Battle of Bryn Glas and the enactment of the penal laws against Wales echoed across the British Isles. The stage was set for an escalation of the conflict, as Glyndŵr and his supporters dug in for a protracted struggle against the might of the English war machine. As the year 1403 started, the realm of England found itself gripped by the twin spectres of rebellion and betrayal. The flames of Owain Glyndŵr's Welsh uprising, fanned by the defection of the powerful Edmund Mortimer, continued to rage, while closer to home, a new threat was brewing, one that would strike at the very heart of King Henry IV's authority. In the northern counties, the powerful Percy family, longtime allies of the Lancastrian dynasty, began to voice their discontent with the king's policies and leadership. The Percys, led by the formidable Henry Hotspur Percy and his father, the Earl of Northumberland, had grown increasingly disillusioned with Henry IV's handling of the Welsh rebellion and his perceived neglect of the restive border regions with Scotland. As tensions mounted, a conspiracy took shape, with the Percys and their allies hatching a plot to depose Henry IV and place the young Edmund Mortimer, the Earl of March and Glyndŵr's ally, on the throne. The rebels sought to capitalize on Mortimer's tenuous claim to the crown, hoping to rally support from disaffected nobles and tap into the groundswell of Welsh nationalism. On July 21, 1403, the spark that ignited this simmering rebellion was struck. Near the town of Shrewsbury, in the heart of the Welsh marches, the forces of Henry IV and the rebel Percy faction clashed in a bloody and decisive encounter. that would become known as the Battle of Shrewsbury. The King's army, led by the experienced Prince Henry, the future Henry V, faced off against the rebel forces commanded by the fiery Henry Hotspur Percy. The two sides engaged in a brutal and chaotic melee, with the fate of the Lancastrian dynasty hanging in the balance. As the battle raged, the rebels' hopes of victory were dashed by a series of strategic blunders and the ferocity of the royal troops. In a pivotal moment, the legendary archer Thomas Erpingham unleashed a devastating volley of arrows that tore through the rebel ranks, sowing chaos and confusion. Amid the maelstrom of combat, Henry Hotspur Percy, the embodiment of the rebel cause, was cut down, struck by an arrow that pierced his face. With their leader slain, the rebel forces began to crumble, and the tide of the battle turned decisively in favor of the king's men. The Battle of Shrewsbury proved to be a watershed moment, not only for the rebellion itself, but for the future of the Lancastrian dynasty. Henry IV had emerged victorious, his authority reasserted through the crucible of battle, but the victory had come at a steep cost, with scores of noble lives lost and the rift between the king and his erstwhile allies laid bare. In the aftermath of Shrewsbury, Henry IV moved swiftly to consolidate his position and stamp out the embers of rebellion. The Earl of Northumberland, the patriarch of the Percy clan, was stripped of his lands and titles, while other rebel leaders met with varying fates. Some were pardoned, others executed, and still others forced into exile. But even as the immediate threat of the Percy Rebellion was extinguished, the broader conflagration of Glyndŵr's Welsh uprising continued to rage. The rebel leader himself, emboldened by the Percy's bold challenge to the English crown, pressed his advantage, capturing key strongholds and expanding the reach of his insurgency. As 1404 unfolded, the reverberations of the Percy Rebellion continued to ripple across the realm. In the northern counties, where the Percys had once held sway, pockets of resistance and unrest persisted, fueled by lingering resentment toward the Lancastrian monarch and the harsh reprisals meted out in the wake of Shrewsbury. But it was in the Welsh marches that the greatest threat to Henry's rule took shape, as Owain Glyndŵr's rebellion metamorphosed into a full-blown war for Welsh independence. Emboldened by his alliance with the disaffected Mortimer faction, Glyndŵr sought to capitalize on the instability wrought by the Percy uprising, positioning himself as the champion of Welsh national aspirations. In a bold and defiant move, Glyndŵr convened a parliament of his own, gathering Welsh nobles and representatives in the town of Machynlleth. There, in a ceremony steeped in historical symbolism, he was officially crowned as Prince of Wales, a direct challenge to the authority of the English crown and a rallying cry for Welsh self-determination. As news of Glyndŵr's coronation spread, it sent shockwaves through the English court, prompting Henry IV to take decisive action. The king issued a series of proclamations, branding Glyndŵr and his followers as traitors and offering bounties for their capture or death. These harsh measures, coupled with the ongoing enforcement of the penal laws against Wales, reflected the English crown's determination to crush the Welsh rebellion by any means necessary. On the battlefield, the conflict between Glyndŵr's forces and the English army escalated to new heights of brutality and intensity. In a daring raid, the Welsh rebels captured the strategically vital Sycharth and Harlech castles, dealing a stinging blow to English control over the region and further galvanizing support for Glyndŵr's cause. In response, Henry IV dispatched a formidable force under the command of his son, the future Henry V, to confront the Welsh insurgents. The ensuing campaign was marked by a series of bloody skirmishes and pitched battles, as the English troops struggled to gain a foothold in the rugged Welsh terrain and contend with the guerrilla tactics employed by Glyndŵr's seasoned fighters. One of the most notable engagements of the year was the Battle of Pwll Melyn, where Glyndŵr's forces ambushed and routed a large English contingent, inflicting heavy casualties and capturing valuable supplies and munitions. This stunning victory served to further solidify Glyndŵr's reputation as a brilliant military strategist and a formidable adversary to the English crown. As the year drew to a close, the situation in Wales remained precarious, with Glyndŵr's rebellion showing no signs of abating. The English forces, despite their numerical superiority and resources, found themselves bogged down in a protracted guerrilla conflict, struggling to gain the upper hand against an enemy that seemed to melt into the rugged Welsh landscape. Beyond the battlefields of Wales, the spectre of the Percy Rebellion continued to loom over Henry IV's reign. In a desperate bid to shore up his authority and quell the lingering embers of dissent, Henry IV took the extraordinary step of pardoning the aging Earl of Northumberland, the erstwhile leader of the Percy Rebellion. This act of clemency, while perhaps motivated by pragmatism, further underscored the precarious nature of the king's position and the delicate balancing act required to maintain the loyalty of the fractious nobility. As 1405 unfolded, Henry found himself confronted with the grim reality that his hold on the restive region of Wales was tenuous at best. Glyndŵr's rebellion had metastasized into a full-blown war for national liberation, fueled by a potent cocktail of Welsh nationalism, resentment toward English oppression, and the rebel leader's own military genius. The army sent by the king in the previous year, led by his son, was bolstered by contingents of experienced veterans from the ongoing conflict with France, continued their struggle with the singular objective of crushing Glyndŵr's rebellion and reasserting English dominance over the Welsh marches. One of the most remarkable engagements of the year was the Battle of Woodbury Hill, where Glyndŵr's rebels achieved a stunning victory against a vastly superior English force. Employing ingenious tactics and exploiting their intimate knowledge of the terrain, the Welsh fighters routed the English, capturing valuable supplies and munitions, and further cementing their leader's reputation as a military mastermind. As the campaign dragged on, the English found themselves bogged down in a quagmire, unable to deliver the decisive blow that would break the back of the Welsh rebellion. Glyndŵr's forces, emboldened by their successes, continued to strike at English strongholds and supply lines, making it increasingly difficult for the invading army to maintain its lines of communication and resupply. Beyond the battlefields of Wales, the spectre of domestic unrest and noble dissent continued to haunt Henry IV's reign. The previous year had seen the king extend a controversial pardon to the aging Earl of Northumberland, the erstwhile leader of the Percy Rebellion, in a bid to quell the lingering embers of dissent within the nobility. However, this act of clemency did little to assuage the simmering resentments and grievances that had fueled the Percy uprising. Faced with this perfect storm of external and internal threats, Henry IV took decisive action, cracking down on the alleged conspirators and executing several high-ranking individuals implicated in the plot. These harsh measures, while perhaps necessary to preserve the stability of the realm, only served to further alienate segments of the nobility. The dark cloud of the previous few years continued to darken England in 1406, as Glyndŵr's rebellion showed no signs of abating. The rebel leader's forces, emboldened by their stunning victories at Woodbury Hill and other engagements, continued to strike at English strongholds and supply lines. In a move that underscored the gravity of the situation, Henry IV took the extraordinary step of recalling his son from the Welsh campaign, entrusting the overall command to Sir Henry Percy, the same man who had led a rebellion against the king just a few years earlier. This decision, while perhaps motivated by a desire to preserve the heir to the throne, also highlighted the mounting desperation of the English crown in its struggle to subdue the Welsh rebellion. As the new English commander, Percy brought a fresh approach to the campaign, seeking to employ a combination of military force and diplomacy to undermine Glyndŵr's support base and fracture the unity of the rebel forces. However, these efforts proved largely futile, as the Welsh insurgents remained steadfastly loyal to their charismatic leader and deeply committed to the cause of national liberation. On the battlefield, the conflict descended into a bloody stalemate as Glyndŵr's forces continued to employ hit-and-run tactics and ambushes, exploiting their intimate knowledge of the rugged Welsh terrain to harry and wear down the English troops. Skirmishes and small-scale engagements erupted with regularity, but neither side seemed capable of delivering the decisive blow that would turn the tide of the conflict. As 1406 progressed, rumours and whispers of fresh conspiracies against the king's life continued to swirl through the corridors of power, fueling an atmosphere of paranoia and mistrust within the Lancastrian court. The spectre of the Percy uprising, though seemingly quelled, still cast a long shadow over Henry's reign, serving as a stark reminder of the fragility of his hold on the crown and the ever-present threat of noble rebellion. In a desperate bid to shore up his authority and project an image of strength, Henry IV took the draconian step of ordering the execution of the revered former Archbishop of York, Richard Scrope. Scrope, who had allegedly been implicated in yet another plot against the king, was put to death in a move that horrified many within the clergy and the nobility, further eroding the already tenuous bonds of loyalty that held the realm together. As the year drew to a close, the situation in England remained precarious, with the kingdom teetering on the brink of chaos and disintegration. The Welsh Rebellion, fueled by Glyndŵr's military prowess and the fervent nationalism of his followers, showed no signs of abating, while the spectre of noble dissent and potential uprisings continued to cast a pall over the Lancastrian court. Following the execution of the Archbishop of York, the nobles and clergy were in an uproar. Henry realized he had to do something to protect his throne and stop the country from breaking out into full-scale civil war. In a bid to shore up his authority and project an image of strength, Henry IV took the bold step of summoning a great council, a gathering of the realm's most powerful nobles and ecclesiastical figures. In the spring of 1407, the Great Council convened in Westminster, marking one of the most inclusive political gatherings of its time. The proceedings were marked by frank discussions and heated debates, with critics voicing their grievances against the king's policies and conduct. Henry faced a barrage of accusations, including mismanagement of the realm's finances, failure to uphold justice, and extravagant spending on his household and retinue. The council's members, emboldened by their diverse representation, did not hold back in their criticism of the monarch. Faced with these challenges to his authority, Henry adopted a defensive stance, justifying his actions and seeking to rally support for his continued rule. He argued that the financial strain on the kingdom was a consequence of the ongoing conflicts, particularly the costly Welsh Rebellion. Henry also emphasized his efforts to maintain law and order, painting himself as a bulwark against chaos and anarchy. Crucially, the king acknowledged the need for reform and promised to address the council's grievances. He pledged to rein in overspending, curb the excesses of his household, and ensure a more equitable administration of justice throughout the realm. While the Great Council of 1407 did not directly challenge Henry IV's claim to the throne, its proceedings set important precedents that would resonate for years to come. Firstly, the council demonstrated the growing political influence of the gentry and urban classes, foreshadowing the emergence of Parliament as a counterweight to royal power. The inclusion of these representatives in the council's deliberations signaled a shift toward a more inclusive and participatory form of governance. Secondly, the council's demands for accountability and reform compelled the king to make significant concessions, acknowledging the limitations on his authority and the need to address the concerns of his subjects. This set a precedent for future monarchs, who would increasingly be held to higher standards of transparency and responsible rule. Furthermore, the Great Council of 1407 highlighted the fragility of Henry IV's reign and the enduring resentment stemming from his controversial seizure of the crown. While he managed to weather the immediate storm, the council's proceedings exposed the underlying tensions that would continue to plague his successors. The Great Council of 1407 stands as a pivotal moment in English history, marking a turning point in the relationship between the monarchy and the emerging political classes. By summoning this unprecedented assembly, Henry IV opened the door to greater accountability and shared governance, paving the way for the gradual erosion of absolute royal power. Though he managed to retain his throne, the council's outcomes foreshadowed the constitutional struggles and reforms that would shape the English monarchy in the centuries to come. As the year 1408 dawned, the situation in Wales remained largely unchanged, with Owain Glyndŵr's rebellion against English rule showing no signs of abating. The previous year had witnessed the failure of King Henry IV's Great Council to address the pressing issues facing the realm, including the ongoing conflict in the Welsh Marches. In a desperate bid to regain the initiative, Henry IV once again dispatched his son, the Prince of Wales and future Henry V, to lead the English forces against Glyndŵr's insurgents. The prince brought with him a fresh approach to the campaign, seeking to employ a combination of military might and diplomatic overtures to fracture the unity of the rebel forces. Early in the year, the prince's army launched a series of offensives, striking deep into the heart of Welsh-controlled territory. Bloody skirmishes and pitched battles ensued as Glyndŵr's seasoned guerrilla fighters met the English forces head-on, exploiting their intimate knowledge of the rugged terrain to ambush and harass the invading troops. Despite these setbacks, the prince persisted in his efforts to win over disaffected Welsh lords and noblemen, offering pardons and concessions in exchange for their abandonment of Glyndŵr's cause. However, these diplomatic overtures proved largely futile, as the rebel leader's charismatic hold over his followers remained unbroken. As the campaign dragged on through the spring and summer months, the English forces found themselves bogged down in a quagmire of guerrilla warfare, unable to deliver the decisive blow that could break the back of the Welsh rebellion. Glyndŵr's hit-and-run tactics, coupled with his ability to melt into the rugged Welsh landscape, frustrated the English at every turn. As autumn arrived, the campaign in Wales took on an increasingly desperate character, as the prince and his forces struggled to gain any meaningful advantage over Glyndŵr's tenacious rebels. In a daring move, the prince launched a bold thrust deep into rebel-held territory, seeking to strike at the heart of Glyndŵr's power base. This offensive culminated in the Battle of Bramham Moor, a fierce and bloody engagement that saw the English forces achieve a hard-fought victory over the Welsh insurgents. However, this triumph proved to be a hollow one, as Glyndŵr himself managed to evade capture, melting back into the Welsh heartlands with the core of his forces intact. As the year drew to a close, the situation in Wales remained unresolved, with Glyndŵr's rebellion continuing to defy the efforts of the English crown to quell it. The prince's campaign, though marked by occasional victories, had failed to deliver the decisive blow that could break the back of the Welsh insurgency. As the new year dawned, the prince renewed his efforts to regain the initiative, setting his sights on a key strategic objective: the capture of the formidable Harlech castle. This imposing fortress, perched atop a rocky promontory overlooking the Irish Sea, had been a thorn in the side of the English for years, serving as a vital stronghold for Glyndŵr's forces and a symbol of Welsh defiance. In the late winter of 1409, the prince's army descended upon Harlech, encircling the castle and laying siege to its stalwart defenders. What followed was a protracted and bloody struggle, as the English forces bombarded the fortress with artillery and attempted to breach its formidable walls. Within the castle's walls, the Welsh garrison, led by the indomitable Rhys ap Tewdwr, prepared for a long and bitter siege. Stockpiles of food and water were carefully rationed, while every able-bodied man was pressed into service, manning the battlements and repelling the English assaults with a ferocity born of their unwavering loyalty to Glyndŵr's cause. For months the siege dragged on, with the English forces enduring privations and hardships as they sought to starve the defenders into submission. Sorties and counterattacks were mounted, with both sides suffering heavy casualties in the bitter fighting that raged around the castle's walls. As spring gave way to summer, the situation within Harlech grew increasingly desperate. Food and water supplies dwindled, and disease began to take its toll on the beleaguered garrison. Still, the Welsh defenders held fast, their resolve strengthened by the knowledge that their defiance was a beacon of hope for Glyndŵr's wider rebellion. In a daring attempt to break the siege, Glyndŵr himself led a relief force towards Harlech, engaging the English besiegers in a series of fierce clashes. However, the rebel leader's efforts ultimately proved futile, as the English lines held firm, and his forces were forced to withdraw. As the summer months wore on, the conditions within the besieged castle became horrible. Starvation and disease ravaged the ranks of the defenders as the English tightened their grip and cut off all supply lines to the fortress. Despite these mounting hardships, the garrison of Harlech remained defiant, their indomitable spirit embodied by their commander, Rhys ap Tudor. Time and again, the Welsh repelled English attempts to breach the castle's walls, inflicting heavy casualties on the besieging forces. Yet, as autumn approached, the stark reality of their situation became increasingly apparent. With no hope of relief or reinforcement, and their supplies utterly depleted, the once formidable garrison found itself on the brink of collapse. In a final act of desperation, Tudor attempted to negotiate terms of surrender with the English commander, seeking to secure safe passage for his beleaguered men. However, the prince, emboldened by his imminent victory, rejected these overtures, demanding an unconditional surrender. With no other choice remaining, Tudor and his men prepared for their final stand. On the cold, rain-swept morning of February 13, 1409, the battered and bloodied defenders of Harlech emerged from the castle's gates, laying down their arms and surrendering to the English forces that had besieged them for so long. It was a bitter moment for the Welsh, as one of their most prized fortresses fell into enemy hands, but it was also a testament to their indomitable spirit and unwavering resistance in the face of overwhelming odds. For the prince and his English troops, the fall of Harlech represented a hard-won victory, one that had come at a tremendous cost in lives and resources. In the aftermath of the surrender, the prince sought to extend a measure of mercy to the defeated garrison, allowing the Welsh defenders to depart unharmed in recognition of their valor and steadfastness. This act of chivalry, however small, would resonate throughout the region, earning the prince grudging respect even from his most ardent foes. The capture of Harlech Castle was a symbolic triumph for the English crown, a tangible victory in a conflict that had often seemed without end. As the last year of the decade began, the indomitable rebel leader remained at large, but his forces were scattered and broken. With the fall of Harlech Castle the previous year, Glyndŵr's longtime ally, Edmund Mortimer, had died in the final battle, and Glyndŵr's wife Margaret, along with 2 of his daughters and 3 of Mortimer's granddaughters, were taken prisoner and incarcerated in the Tower of London. They were all to die in the Tower before 1415. Glyndŵr remained free, but now he was a hunted guerrilla leader. The revolt continued to splutter on. In 1410, he readied his supporters for a last raid deep into Shropshire. Many of his most loyal commanders were present. It may have been a last desperate suicide raid. Whatever was intended, the raid went terribly wrong, and many of the leading figures still at large were captured and executed. In 1412, Glyndŵr captured and later ransomed a leading Welsh supporter of King Henry's, Dafydd Gam, in an ambush in Brecon. But these were the last flashes of the revolt, and this was the last time that Glyndŵr was seen alive by his enemies. Many maintained that he was still alive and had gone into hiding, but with all his powerful supporters now dead or captured and his rebellion quashed, none ever saw him again. Beyond the battlefields of Wales, the fog of domestic unrest and noble dissent continued to haunt Henry IV's reign. There were constant rumors and whispers of new conspiracies against the king's life, fueling an atmosphere of paranoia and mistrust within the Lancastrian court. In a bid to shore up his authority and project an image of strength, Henry had resorted to increasingly draconian measures, cracking down on perceived dissidents and potential rivals. This heavy-handed approach, while perhaps necessary to maintain order, only served to further alienate segments of the nobility and sow the seeds of future discontent. But with the flames of rebellion now smothered across the Welsh heartlands, a new chapter in English history was beginning to unfold. The exploits of the prince, the future Henry V, on the battlefields of Wales had earned him a reputation as a skilled and resolute military commander, foreshadowing the triumphs that would mark his reign and the glory that awaited on the fields of Agincourt. As the decade drew to a close, the realm of England found itself at a crossroads, its future hanging in the balance between the fires of rebellion and the promise of a new era of greatness. The events of 1410 had underscored the resilience of the Welsh people and the enduring spirit of resistance that had defied the might of the English crown for a decade. But they had also hinted at the potential for a resurgence of English power and prestige under the leadership of the prince, whose military prowess and determination had been forged in the crucible of the Welsh campaign. As the sands of time shifted, it became clear that the struggles of the present would shape the triumphs and tragedies of the future, setting the stage for a new chapter in the annals of English history. Thank you for watching. If you enjoyed this story, please leave a like and subscribe. As this is a new channel, your likes and subscriptions are hugely important to me. I aim to bring you more stories like this, spanning all the many ages of history. If you would like to support the channel, please go to patreon.com/agesofkings.